Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke CEO offers jobs to protesters, immediately destroys his company. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Here's a mistake that never had to happen from Daily Mail. CEO of hair loss company Hims, actually a public company, sparks outrage and a boycott by offering campus protesters jobs. When you offer jobs to the people protesting on colleges right now, it's not really a good idea. You don't really necessarily want to encourage them because there are some protesters that are out there that are doing nothing legally wrong. There are some protesters out there that are doing nothing legally wrong that might be considered morally wrong. It depends. But there are definitely some wild protesters out there, some people getting arrested for being violent, destructive, intimidating other students, intimidating bystanders. You can't offer all of the protesters jobs because that includes the behavior of the worst protesters. And this CEO is no dummy. He's been involved in business before. He's sophisticated. He also knows better than this because he knows there are a lot of Jewish people in finance. We've seen multiple people in finance who are Jewish speak out and say they support what Israel's doing. How can you get in the middle of all this and think things are going to work out? Hims is also not that big of a public company. On its best day, it might be a $3 billion company. Right now, it's like a $2.5 billion company. So why would a CEO want to be in the middle of a controversial situation, especially one that definitely makes enemies of multiple people in finance who are very powerful? It just makes no sense. So he's tried to walk back his position a little bit. Also from the Daily Mail, Hims CEO walks back his support of college campus protesters after widespread boycott that tanks shares by 10%. The CEO of Palantir has a different idea. From the New York Post, Palantir CEO says Columbia protesters should do exchange program in North Korea. Can you get away with saying things like that if you're the CEO of Palantir? Yes, absolutely. He's received like zero criticism for that statement. Additionally, you have Bill Ackman, who said this months ago. He said this going back to October 2023, right after the Hamas attacks on Israel. From the New York Post, Bill Ackman doubles down on denying jobs to Harvard students who signed anti-Israel letter. That is the mood in finance, and that is the mood throughout most of the country. But if you're going to go ahead and offer jobs to protesters, some of which are definitely breaking the law right now in what they're doing, especially the worst of the worst protesters, you're going to be doing permanent damage to your company. From the Daily Mail, Hims CEO walks back his support of college campus protesters after widespread boycott that tanks shares by 10%. Here's what he said originally. Moral courage is greater than a college degree. If you're currently protesting against the genocide of the Palestinian people and your university's divestment from Israel, keep going. It's working. There are plenty of companies and CEOs eager to hire you, regardless of university discipline. And then he gave an apply here link to his public company at hims.com. The CEO of male hair loss company Hims has sparked furious backlash and threats of a boycott after he offered jobs to university students protesting in support of Palestine. Andrew Dudum, who identifies as Palestinian-American, voiced support for the student protesters across U.S. campuses on Twitter. Now, this guy was actually born in San Francisco and raised there. Critics were quick to react to Dudum's message, with many social media users saying they will be canceling their Hims subscriptions and asking others to do the same. Conservative writer Ben Domenech wrote, "If you support Israel, cancel your Hims subscription immediately. You can get similar products elsewhere for cheaper anyway." Joe Lonsdale, co-founder of software company Palantir Technologies, also weighed in, saying real moral courage doesn't involve joining a mindless mob, chanting anti-US and other woke pablum, following instructions not to debate or discuss your positions at all, yet being indignantly righteous, while large numbers in the mob chant for violence and block Jewish students. And those Jewish students are being blocked from attending their classes. Many pointed out that Dudum may be harming the interests of shareholders who might not agree with him, given that Hims is a publicly traded company. Others shared screenshots of the cancellation of their subscription, with one Twitter user writing as the reason, "Your CEO supports Hamas." Dudum, who has said he has family in Gaza and the West Bank, founded Hims in 2017. Dudum wrote a long blog post in November calling for a ceasefire and lamenting that companies were still supporting Israel after its counterattack. Quote, now a month past the October 7th attack, we find ourselves in a world where Israel has killed an estimated 10,000 Palestinians with over 4,000 innocent children in a military response that nearly all international experts decry as violations of international law and human rights. And the messages of unequivocal support for Israel are still sitting on our corporate pages, untouched nor updated. In the Medium post, Dudum described himself as a father whose children are both the descendants of Palestinian refugees who fled the Nakba in 1948 and the descendants of Holocaust survivors from Poland. The entrepreneur, who's also an accomplished cellist, was born and raised in San Francisco and dropped out of the prestigious Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Dudum's stand comes in contrast with other CEOs who have said they will not hire students participating in the pro-Palestine protests. Police have arrested nearly 2,200 people during pro-Palestine protests at college campuses across the United States in recent weeks, sometimes using riot gear and flashbang devices to clear tenant encampments and occupied buildings. More than 100 people were taken into custody during a Columbia crackdown, just a fraction of the total arrests stemming from recent campus protests over the Israel-Hamas war. There's also a lot of discussion about how these protests are kind of astroturfed. People are being paid to go there. Some people are from the school. Some people protesting are not part of the school. Some people are protesting just to be social. Not everything appears to be what it seems in regards to the protest. A tally by the Associated Press recorded at least 56 incidents of arrests at 43 different U.S. colleges or universities since April 18th. The figures are based on AP reporting the statements from universities and law enforcement agencies. Like at UCLA, tent encampments of protesters calling on universities to stop doing business with Israel or companies they say support the war in Gaza have spread across other campuses nationwide in a student movement, unlike any this century. Israel has branded the protest anti-Semitic, while Israel's critics say it uses those allegations to silence opposition. Here's what the CEO of Palantir has to say about these protests. From the New York Post, Palantir CEO says Columbia protesters should do exchange program in North Korea. Now, if you did an exchange program with North Korea, if North Korea was interested in doing something like that, it definitely would be very educational for anyone involved in that exchange program. Palantir CEO Alex Karp eviscerated anti-Israel protesters who've caused chaos on college campuses, saying they should be shipped off to North Korea as part of an exchange program to give them perspective. The software boss took aim at Columbia students who had shut down the Ivy League campus over the past weeks to rail against Israel's response to Gaza to the deadly October 7th terror attacks by Hamas, and claimed some protesters have even praised North Korea. Quote, we're going to do an exchange program sponsored by Karp, he said. A couple of months in North Korea, nice tasting flavored bar. See how you feel about that. Karp, whose Peter Thiel-linked firm has grown increasingly more important to the government's defense tech plans, was the featured speaker at the invite-only Hill and Valley Forum in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. Look at Columbia, Karp said. There is literally no way to explain the investment in our elite schools, and the output is a pagan religion of mediocrity and discrimination and intolerance and violence. His comments came a day after the NYPD stormed the Columbia campus to arrest more than 100 Palestinian protesters who broke in and occupied Hamilton Hall. The Palantir boss, a vocal supporter of Israel, called the protest unforgivable and incomprehensible during his 30-minute appearance at the event, which is arranged annually to connect elected government officials and tech industry giants. Karp said that the progressive students have bought into an architecture of anti-discrimination while dressing in masks and excluding the population that's been the most discriminated against for the last 3,000 years. But the direction of all this is what Bill Ackman declared. Bill Ackman doubles down on denying jobs to Harvard students who signed anti-Israel letter. Multi-billionaires who happen to be Jewish and happen to support Israel are not going to be hiring people who support these protesters or who are these protesters or who sign letters attacking Israel. It's just not going to happen. Whether the political position is right or wrong, they don't want these people in their companies, and they're going to make sure those people don't get hired. Bill Ackman has doubled down on his push to have companies refuse employment opportunities to Harvard students who signed a letter blaming Israel for Hamas's violent attack that killed more than 1,200 people. The hedge fund billionaire who founded Pershing Square Capital Management held its ground after a Harvard law student slammed him for harassment in response to a social media post on Twitter in which he demanded a list of the signatories of the controversial letter. Quote, if you were managing a business, would you hire someone who blamed the despicable violent acts of a terrorist group on the victims? I don't think so. Would you hire someone who was a member of a school club that issued a statement blaming lynchings of the KKK on their victims, Ackman wrote? I don't think so. It's not harassment to seek to understand the character of the candidates that you're considering for employment, Ackman added. At least a dozen business executives endorsed Ackman's call for Harvard to publish the list bearing the names of the members of the 34 groups that initially attached their names to a letter supporting Hamas. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, a Harvard alum who said he was sickened by the alma mater's failure to explicitly condemn Hamas in the wake of the student group's letter, told Bloomberg News that Ackman was getting a bit carried away in his push to list the names of the group members. Quote, this letter was issued 6 hours after the attack, Summers told Bloomberg News. Many in the groups had no idea there was going to be a letter. Some, I'm sure, were naive and stupid. Yeah, you can be naive and stupid, but people who are decision makers are going to say no to things like this. And if you think that the CEO of HIMSS, a $2.5 billion company or $3 billion company, maybe on its best day, is going to be able to hire those people in place of all of the executives who support Israel, it's not going to happen. Jason Furman, an economist who worked in the Obama administration and who was a professor at Harvard, seconded Summers' sentiment, saying that 2 wrongs do not make a right. Yet this is a pretty big wrong, though. Publishing lists of students and personal information under the headings terrorist, genocidal murderer, and anti-Semite is just wrong in any circumstance, and especially when many of the people named have nothing to do with the statement, Furman wrote in a post on his Twitter account. If you didn't sign off on the statement, okay, fine, then you didn't approve that statement, but you kind of need to leave that group if the group is going to be signing statements like that. These kinds of political things should not be part of someone's career. If they sign on to this, if they want to try to exploit the power they have to say, yeah, I want to push for what Hamas was pushing in Israel, it's going to cost people their career. There's no question about it. It doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe. You can believe this or that. But here's how Bill Ackman explained it. Here, some advice for students. If an organization of which you are a member puts out a public statement you disagree with, you have a few choices. You can stay silent and have the entire world conclude that you stand by the statement. Convince the other members of the group to withdraw or otherwise modify the statement so that it can reflect the views of all members. Or you can resign and protest, claiming that you had no involvement or knowledge of the statement, but remaining a member of the organization without it withdrawing the statement is perhaps the worst of the alternatives, as it appears to simply be an attempt to avoid accountability while continuing to be a member of the organization. Ackman continues, I have heard that the inquiry about who signed off on this letter and who's part of these groups supporting this letter have made some members of the group which put out the statement feel unsafe, a word that's sadly overused in universities today. Ask yourself how unsafe your Jewish classmates feel when 32 clubs published a statement assigning sole responsibility for the heinous, deathly acts of terrorists to Israel and the Jews. Experience is making mistakes and learning from them. If you've made a mistake, acknowledge it and immediately correct your mistaken actions. Public statements by organizations of which you are a member can have a material negative effect on your reputation. I have learned from experience that the best time to fix a mistake is now. In industry, in business, in finance, what Bill Ackman is saying is what's taken as the general logic of the situation. You can go against it, whether you're a CEO or you're an employee or you're a student, but it will affect the rest of your life and your career. That's just the way it is. Anyone is entitled to take their position and stick with their position, but they will be held accountable for it. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.